Happy Friday and welcome to Crypto in America Live, the only show bringing you candid conversations on the biggest news stories, legal issues, and policy developments shaping the crypto world every Friday at 12:30 Eastern. Hey guys.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Yes.
We made
Busy
it.
week. Yeah. Another one down. Yeah.
We made it. It doesn't feel like the crypto industry necessarily made it this week, at least parts of the crypto industry.
Or the DeFi side too. We had a big hack this week with Drift Protocol as well. So
big hack.
It's been a long week probably for many people in this space.
Yes. We'll get into the hack. I think that's going to be probably 2/3 of the show today. We'll talk about that with Rebecca Rettig. She's the Chief Operating and Chief Legal Officer at Jito Labs. We'll also talk about that with Austin Campbell, founder at Zero Knowledge Group. And we'll talk about the new push to get into digital assets. I say get into. They've been in the space for a long time. Franklin Templeton, right? They've been in since like 2018. But Chris Perkins, friend of the show, he is going to lead the new push, Franklin Crypto. It's going to be, I think, a push to, keep going in institutional digital assets for that Wall Street asset manager, big name in the space. Awesome for Chris. He's going to come on and tell us all about the big news this week at Franklin Templeton. So, stacked show as usual. Let's get into the headlines, starting with CFTC. What'd you say, Gerald?
I said, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right.
What was that, Gerald? Yeah. Go ahead, Ellie.
Chiming in there.
Yeah.
Well, another big push by the CFTC to try and bring the prediction markets under federal jurisdiction as opposed to state. We saw the agency take quite an unprecedented step by suing 3 states this week: Illinois, Arizona, and Connecticut. They even sued the Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, arguing that the state overstepped by trying to block prediction market platforms in the state. It says it falls exclusively under the federal oversight, not state. So quite a big move here.
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, I think Nevada is like ground zero for all this just because of the gambling community. I know we're waiting on some decisions from courts in that state right now, I believe. But yeah, it's really interesting. And I know Chair Seelig has been very vocal, doing a lot of interviews, posting on social media about preemption as a big issue. So yeah, I mean, there's also been a lot of historical context drawn. You know, I think Brian Quinten's also was sort of clapping back at some folks on how well established preemption is for these binary future markets. So yeah, I guess just having a federal regulator come in and actually actively litigate on this issue, definitely pretty unusual. But I think the CFTC has made it like very clear what their stance is on this set of products. And so, you know, we'll see how it goes. Also, I'll say fighting, there's when you're litigating, there's a lot of choice of venue that we've talked about in the past. Like if you get a decision for an injunction in like the Ninth Circuit in California, then maybe that holds up. Maybe you go to a more conservative district in another. And so it's interesting that they're going to be fighting these, like they may actually come out with competing conclusions here across the courts in each of these states. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. I feel like just in general, kind of the divisiveness, I would maybe say, between the states and the federal government has been interesting to watch. It's not just unique to prediction markets, as we know, but I don't know. I think maybe like the angle of the federal government, like really taking the back of prediction markets, is something that we should get someone on to talk about and dive into deeper. Like, why are they taking such a strong stance for it?
Maybe Chair Seelig. Maybe that would be a good person.
Yeah, there you go.
Talk about it. Yeah.
If you're listening, feel free to come on and tell us why.
We'll get him on. Maybe Chair Gensler as well, former Chair Gensler. He's actually weighed in on this recently. He talked to Politico last week, and actually he has his own podcast now. Did you guys know this? Gary Gensler has his own podcast.
I don't think he needs that free advertising for us.
Yeah.
We will not name the show.
Yeah.
No.
I don't know what the show is called actually, but someone told me that he has a podcast. But anyway, he did weigh in on the prediction markets debacle, should we call it? And he said he can't remember anyone in Congress talking about how the post-crisis reforms were intended to preempt state gaming laws. And I guess he's the post-crisis talking about 2008.
Well, look, and this is the argument that I think so outside of sports, I saw a tweet from Quintens talking about grain futures. There's like binary futures have been a thing under CFTC jurisdiction for a long time. I think the debate where maybe this ends up in the Supreme Court is whether or not binary futures on sports specifically, because there's a long established history for political markets, for commodities, like all these other things. But we're probably going to get to the Supreme Court on this at some point, just on whether or not a binary future on a sporting event is gambling or not. And the CFTC is obviously taking a very firm position that it is not. And the states, especially those with big gambling industries, are taking the stance that it is. And so that's probably where this is going to end up, because otherwise you're just going to be back and forth. And like, there are better uses at the state level and probably at the federal level, than arguing about whether or not a sporting event is a binary future. So we'll see. And then on the back of this also, I thought it was interesting. We'll give a quick shout out. Polymarket released in partnership with Pith Oracles, the binary futures on stock movement. So we're doing some pretty creative things with binary futures right now. Like obviously if you have a derivative or you have a security based swap, that's going to be firmly in security territory. So if you're betting kind of on will Amazon stock go up or down, we're taking a pretty confident stance that is also a binary future, because you're not actually investing in the stock. You're just essentially placing a future on action price movement based on some kind of a pricing pair with an oracle. And so like the prediction markets industry is getting pretty creative. And yeah, I think it's going to take on sports and some of these equity based instruments, like it's going to take somebody to make some decisions here.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we'll see.
Yeah.
Could be a Supreme Court battle. All right,
I know they're not busy at all. So
no, not at all. But they only take up 1% of cases that they are pitched. But I feel like they would probably take this one up because it's in the public interest.
Yep.
But we'll see. All right. Well, crypto has officially started ramping up its midterm efforts. This week, we saw the launch of a new hybrid pack from members of the Digital Chamber, Anchorage Digital, and Chainlink. And also the Fellowship Pack announced that Tether's head of regulatory affairs, Jesse Spiro, will be its chairman. And they said that they would be announcing a slate of endorsements for candidates in the coming days. And then obviously we had Mason on from Stand With Crypto last week. They announced their 2026 roadmap for supporting candidates for the midterms. I feel like this has just been the last 2 weeks kind of peak kickoff season for crypto getting involved in the elections again, like they did in 2024. So more candidate endorsements to come, I think, from the Tether-backed pack that we're seeing here. And yeah, just another big crypto blitz, I guess we're gearing up for. We'll cover this more on the show, obviously, as the months and the weeks go by. But interesting that the Digital Chamber members actually kind of kicked off their own pack. There's a lot more packs this year, as we know. It's not just Fair Shake anymore.
Yeah, the Kobe quote, "Job not done," right? Like even if clarity passes, over the summer before the midterms, which I know people are getting increasingly optimistic about, and we'll see, how that goes. I know there were a lot of announcements, particularly from Coinbase, about solving this issue within 48 hours at some point this week, and it's about 48 hours, and so we'll see if we get any movement there. But yeah, obviously, like there's still a lot of work to be done. Congressional candidates on both sides of the aisle need to be aware that we're still here. This wasn't like a flash in the pan, and so it's exciting to see, as you mentioned, Ellie, like the field growing, just in terms of methods that we can support candidates who support pro crypto policies. So I think overall it's great to see. Yeah.
Also, Ellie, did you mention the Fellowship Pack also brought on Tether's head of regulatory affairs?
Yeah, and we're gonna have to have Jesse on to chat about that, because that's a cool one. That's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. I think it also kind of just points to Tether's like deeper dive into the U.S. following USAT and their relationship with Bo Hines, bringing him on as well. So it's just interesting to see. And I'm honestly curious to see how all these packs kind of like band together maybe for the greater good. Is that a thing? Do they get together or no? They kind of...
Well, I think you can probably tell from the groupings of the biggest backers, like who potentially, like what issues they're going to be most focused on, right? So I know who's Fair Shakers is Coinbase, Ripple, and
A16Z.
And A16Z. So they obviously got a lot done this past election cycle. And so it'll be interesting to see some other voices, moving a little closer to the halls of Congress, as we all have been over the past year, and sort of putting their money, in front of some of these issues.
Yeah, for sure. We'll keep an eye on it. And something else we're keeping an eye on is the Genius Act rule implementation. So we got an announcement this week, the Treasury Department officially kicking off its effort to implement the Genius Act rulemaking. They had a release of an ANPR, which is my new favorite acronym for a notice of advanced rulemaking. It's a 60-day comment period, an 87-page rule. Some early reactions that I've been hearing is that the wording takes a little bit more of a restrictive view on what qualifies as substantially similar when it comes to state law and federal standards. Moody's, the credit rating agency, flagged that the framework could lead to meaningfully different risk profiles between state and federally regulated issuers, stablecoin issuers, depending on how states meet or exceed federal standards. So some mixed reactions. Obviously, it's very early. A lot of people are going to be weighing in and commenting on this. Big implications here, but yeah, just another rollout of the Genius Act that we saw pass nearly a year ago. We're coming up on, it's April now. It passed in June or July of last year.
July, I think.
July, yeah. So isn't that crazy? Almost a year.
Yeah, almost.
And clarity's still not done.
And this, but this is what happens, right? Like you need guidance. A lot of people have been talking about the review periods. They're going to come for the agencies after clarity passes, if it passes. And the truth is, like, this sausage takes a while to make. So yeah, good to see something come out, and maybe we could have Tyler on to talk about where Treasury stands on some of this stuff. It's good to see it, moving through the pipes, as it were.
Yeah. Right. The rulemaking is it's 2/3 of it, right? Like another year and a half to 2 to 3 years.
Legislation is basically just Congress saying, go figure this out.
Right.
And then everybody has to go figure it out. It's a
tiny little percentage of it. I know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into the hack, because we are going to spend a lot of the show talking about this today. But for those who don't know what happened, a major hack happened on the Drift protocol. And it's got the whole DeFi industry on edge this week. And basically what happened is an attacker found a way to trick Drift's system into showing inaccurate prices, which then allowed them to game trades and pull out around $285 million from the platform. And there have been a lot of interesting takes on this one this week. We saw some tweets fired off from Tolly, from Hayden Adams, from Uniswap. Austin Campbell will obviously be on the show later to talk about it. We've got Rebecca coming on in a couple of minutes, but just want to get your guys' take on this quickly. It's been a big point of conversation this week.
Speaking of other people's takes too, someone, I think his name is Suhail. I'm probably butchering that, but he works at Polymarket. You guys would know him if you saw him, but he basically did this whole long post about how DeFi is dead now. And then Stani, who's been on the show, friend of the show, replies DeFi is not dead. And then it became this big debate around what DeFi's perception looks like outside of this whole crypto sphere, right? Because I know TechCrunch reported it as DeFi protocol, and so did Bloomberg and others, right? So it's being treated, and the argument was oh, it's not DeFi, right? But it is to everyone outside of this, and it's not a good look for us in any capacity, and it's extremely unfortunate.
Yeah.
I also saw that CoinDesk reported that Elliptic's analysis of this was that it was likely tied back to North Korean hackers, which is not a good look for us in any capacity, because again, it's a national security risk. There's so many implications there. And it kind of just goes to the point of those DeFi summer days are still within this space, even though we've matured in so many other ways.
Yeah, I think so. Lazarus Group, which is a group tied to North Korea, I think they've taken something like $6.5 billion out of crypto over the last few years. I think I don't want to get too much the devil's in the details here. I do agree with there's
a lot of
it's the oversimplification. So they basically, it was pretty sophisticated, and it was kind of a what's that movie from the 60s or 70s about the long con. It basically this is a pretty sophisticated attack. They took over what was actually a pretty weak security wise multi-sig. So it was a 2 of 5. And again, I don't want to get super into the weeds, because I know we're going to talk about this with Rebecca and Austin, but created a fake token, and then basically through misrepresenting like an oracle, essentially maxed out this fake token, and then just pulled out like a ton of money from the protocol. That's like a gross oversimplification, but that's basically how they game the system. And I will also point out, like Drift, I think it also passed 2 security audits in the past. So like the auditors also, and what's funny to me is like, you can call this a DeFi thing, but like Enron had passed, you know, what became Accenture. So like Enron had passed audits. Like there's a problem in TradFi as well of like, you know, auditors not necessarily being this like ultimate source of truth for whether or not you can rely on something. It's not unique to crypto. But yeah, it's a pretty big hit. It's like, you know, kicking the industry when it's down, right? Like people still haven't really recovered from 1010. There's a lot going on. Yeah.
And at a time when we're trying to get a major piece of legislation passed where DeFi and illicit finance are a flashpoint. Yeah.
Also, it's worth noting that I believe the hackers were looking into, or the hackers were kind of poking around with this starting like March 23rd. And then it was like, it came to light on April 1st. And so it was like over a week, like 7-8 days.
Yeah, that's what I meant about like a long con. Yeah, there's like small transactions tied. Like it's it's interesting. And it points more, I think, to like, does DeFi governance work in its current state? Like that's maybe more of a bigger issue, because if you can take over a 2 of 5 multi-sig on a $1 billion protocol, then like maybe your governance wasn't like quite as buttoned up. I don't want to, again, like you don't want to kick a project when you're down, and like, you know, we want to point like people lost money, and like this is, you know, obviously terrible for individuals, but yeah, it's a rough situation.
Well, to give us her expert take on this and all things DeFi in the headlines lately is friend of the show, Rebecca Rettig, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Legal Officer at Jito. Rebecca, welcome back. It's been too long.
Thank you. Fun to be back with my friends.
Good to see you.
I wish it was under better conditions Drift, but it's good to see you regardless. Yeah.
Good to see you.
So I have to get your thoughts on the Drift drama. There's other drama we want to get into with you as well. But when we take a look at the postmortem here, what does it say to you about someone who's seen hacks of this nature in the past, and just how some of these systems are being designed and governed today? What does this tell you?
Yeah, great question. And I'll take something that Gerald was talking about, where he's like, well, these underwent 2 audits, but the audits were looking at just whether there were vulnerabilities in the smart contracts themselves. Right. And this was a social engineering hack. There's a Web 2 hack. We've seen this a million times. I think the most interesting thing is that IBM Promontory actually did the report commissioned by the EU under MiCA about DeFi and said smart contract hacks have fallen off a ton in the last year or so. And so, you know, we're still at the place where people don't have the best cybersecurity standards. I have long been talking about how cyber is the most important way to secure assets and to make sure that DeFi is secure. I've been talking to NIST for many years, which is the sort of cybersecurity regulator. They're not even really a regulator, cybersecurity agency in the government here in the US, and others have been talking about it as well. We've talked to the arm of Treasury who deals with cyber standards and deals with financial institutions on that. So I think there's a recognition that we have to do something on cyber. And I think this is unfortunately just another indication of that. Of course, like very much sorry for the victims, sorry for the team. Like this is not something we want to see. And Jackie, as you said, we certainly don't want to see North Korea being able to exploit these protocols, let alone anyone else. So.
Yeah. It also seems like for some of the perception that I've read online, and like also just based off the reports, the new reports on this, is like these failures often come down to kind of like control and like who's actually moving the funds, who are able to actually access these things. And so do you think the industry still has like a mislabeling problem when it comes to the term decentralized, when they rely on like, you know, centralized points like multi-sigs or admin access or, you know, other avenues where it is like a few parties that actually can move things?
Yeah, I feel lucky that I actually have like a paper out there that I talk about this explicitly, so I can just rely on something I've said years ago without being too controversial, or maybe saying it again now will be controversial. But the question that we have to look at generally about whether there's regulation is whether someone has control. And control is a question of control over user assets. Can you immediately and unilaterally affect third-party funds? That idea of control, not exactly as I said it, but is in the draft of clarity out there. Also working with NIST on cyber standards is out there as well. And so, yeah, we definitely have a mislabeling problem in our industry generally. I've long said, like, do you want to build on-chain finance? You should build on-chain finance. No aspersions on what people want to build. But we just have to be really, really honest. And to your point, Jackie, use the right words for what we are building. And it's okay if you want to build something that has centralized features in it, but then we need to have the appropriate guardrails around that, whether it comes through cyber, whether it comes through some other type of regulation. But we just have to be really honest about what we're building or what we've built and what that requires.
Rebecca, is part of this on the DeFi side, just to oversimplify it a bit, like a math problem? Is there, because, we talked about like a 205 obviously being kind of a vulnerability. You're not going to go to 100% consensus on every time you're trying to approve actions like this. But how do you feel like that like sliding scale works out in practice? Because it's obviously also super impractical to wait 24 hours to get 1,000 people to approve something. So like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, multi-sigs are a very complicated problem, as are admin keys. And I sort of, in the paper that Mike Mosher and I put out a few years ago, we do address the question of admin keys and what that means. I think it is the most complicated question we have to answer from a policy perspective when it comes to DeFi, because not everything is completely autonomous and the admin key's been burned, like versions of Uniswap and things like that. I think that, look, the 2 of 5 with 2 people from the same organization holding keys is a cyber question, and whether you have the right operational security standards in place. And we need to make sure not just that we're doing security audits, but that we have general security auditors looking at all your standards. And it's not just your admin keys. It's obviously your admin keys. It's who holds the passwords and information to get on your social media, right? We saw, I think, Hayden get hacked a couple of years ago, his Twitter, and saying sort of crazy things. And people had to come out and say, like, this is not, Hayden's been hacked, because it was about like investing or using Uniswap in some way or something like that. So like operational security goes across your entire organization. And if you are an org that built a DeFi protocol and is known and associated to, or on-chain finance, whatever we're talking about, like there is a security you got to do across the board.
Rebecca, let's get to Canton, because this is another front in the centralized versus decentralized debate. And when you look at what they're building compared to what others like Solana and Ethereum are building in the permissionless world, what's the main difference here? And kind of what's the argument that's been playing out back and forth in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things about it. People have been framing it as Canton versus Solana, but I think it's a much broader question, which is, are we going to be using permissioned shared ledgers, or are we going to be using permissionless blockchains? I think I'm phrasing it really intentionally, because traditional finance now uses shared blockchains in many ways, or shared databases in many ways, and they know how to do that. And so maybe they do feel comfortable doing that. I'm just not sure that those databases will give you the same, or ledgers will give you the same benefits as a permissionless network, right? We've seen really deep liquidity in Ethereum, really deep liquidity in Solana, and a lot of efficiency, very low fees. And so I think the question really is, like, what are we all competing for? And it's very clear, I think Canton is competing for the institutions, but so are the permissionless networks. And I think a number of the permission chains are using features of the permissionless networks to try to say institutions can never come on here. And I think that overlooks a lot of the advancements that have been made when you're using permissionless blockchains that'll make it attractive for institutions to deploy here as well.
Mm-hmm. There's also still that narrative out there that institutions need these like closed systems, or this word privacy and it won't be ready to operate on public blockchains. And I think, the privacy factor plays into this, obviously. But from the conversations that you're having today, Rebecca, do you think that's actually true, that they're really not going to touch this until they do have that privacy layer?
So it's interesting. I was in a roundtable with institutions talking about some of these issues, and especially on the illicit finance side this week. One of the most interesting things that a very large institution said is, we don't even think of this as a separate asset class anymore. This is just part of our business. So I think that's a really good piece to take away. I think the other thing to take away from this is there's been a lot of guidance by the bank regulators over the last 6 months that explicitly recognizes features of permissionless networks. You can run nodes, you can pay gas fees, like they've said it very explicitly, but other regulators haven't made the same statements, including and especially on the illicit finance side. And so there's a difference between what compliance departments within financial institutions think they can do. Understandably, by the way, this is not a criticism, right? They're used to operating within certain rules, regulations, and implementations of the Bank Secrecy Act that they think are necessary for their business. And they need some guidance to be able to move forward, to be able to start using permissionless networks in a way they feel comfortable. I'm working on that right now in terms of trying to put some risk frameworks together and put something out there for discussion. So hopefully that'll be out soon.
Yeah. So on that note, Rebecca, you've talked about having permissionless networks like Solana handle transaction ordering, privacy, customization. I know like attestations were rolled out earlier this year. There's like token extensions have been around for a while. On the issue of like customization or sort of putting together these like boxes for institutions, like what do you think has changed there? Or what do you think the kind of features are that some of these partners you guys are talking to are looking for?
Great question. And I'll give a better, more direct answer privacy question too. I realized I sort of lured that answer into something else, but I didn't mean to. Look, not to show my own bags, but I was created something called the Block Assembly Marketplace that allows institutions to do customization and how they're using what validator actually can see their transactions and the like. Also creates privacy for transaction ordering. And so lots of people are building tools that'll give the transaction ordering certainty, right? So no minimizing MEV, that will also offer privacy right before settlement with validators, and will allow them to, the chains to remain permissionless and open while still letting institutions make decisions about how and where they're going to use these networks.
Yeah. Rebecca, I like the glasses. Putting that on at the end of the live stream. We can't not address that.
Yeah.
Okay. Outfit change. Yeah.
These are my blue light glasses that I bought on Amazon.
Okay.
Love it. So I want to follow up on that on the privacy front. So I think we've talked before, and I think Catherine, a good friend of yours, good friend of the show, has said before that it would be like ironic or disappointing if ZK's best implementation was for institutions. But we've talked before about how institutions are looking for some kind of element of, whether it's like viewer keys or, some kind of element of zero knowledge built into some of these systems. Like where do you think we're going with that?
I think everybody is still working on this, right? Like, I think ZK it's been around for a long time. I think we haven't seen full implementations. We definitely have to figure out the digital identity question. I don't think that needs to look like KYC by a separate vendor and then like plugging it into your wallet. I think there are a lot of ways to advance the ball forward on how we do digital identity and how we make sure we know who's plugging into what systems and where. And I think we need to advance our risk frameworks on illicit finance too, and within financial institutions and how they can think about working with these, right? Like paying gas fees to an unknown validator is not going to take down your entire bank, right? Like even if it ends up being you inadvertently paid to somebody on the sanctions list or something like that. But we also, the analytics companies have been building out a lot. One of the things that I think Treasury can do is to really incentivize innovation from the analytics companies and those who are building. And the innovation side for the builders who know what's going on, right? I talked to analytics companies a lot about saying like, we need this and we need to reduce the latency by a lot. And can you do that? And, they're being pulled in a lot of different directions because they certainly work for the government, they work for institutions, and they're working for builders. And so I think we definitely need to incentivize having those who are building out these systems also build for the builders who know what we need to make sure we can get these networks, in shape for financial institutions to deploy here in size.
Rebecca, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Bye.
I love her with glasses.
Yeah, it's a good look. It's a good look. Yeah.
I could not acknowledge those. I have blue light glasses. I don't know if that's what they were, but
yeah,
I have blue light glasses, and they're kind of like wire rimmed, but I want to get like the big chunky frames. I feel like those are so in right now.
Maybe we'll do an episode just all glasses.
Glasses.
See how it goes. We'll just use her. We'll A/B test
brought
it.
to you by
Do we seem smarter with blue light glasses on?
That segment.
Yeah. All right. Well, Franklin Templeton was one of the earliest Wall Street players in crypto, starting back in 2018 when it began building out its digital assets team. But this week, the firm announced a new dedicated unit, Franklin Crypto, saying it's going all in on institutional grade digital asset products. Chris Perkins is the former president and managing partner at CoinFund, and he's now CEO of a spinoff of CoinFund called 250 Digital. He's stepping in to help lead the new effort, Franklin Crypto, and he joins us now. Chris, congrats on the big move and welcome back to Crypto in America.
Nice. Oh my gosh, glasses.
It's glasses day. I couldn't help myself. I was watching Rebecca. All right.
I love it.
I love it. Okay,
hey,
back to the normal glasses. This is
good to see you. Yeah. Congratulations, first of all. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Super, super excited. Look, Franklin Templeton are OG institutional players in the space. They have the culture to win. We had a great chat, and it was just so obvious that together we could do some amazing things. As you guys know, it's the institutional era of crypto. And when you look at asset management as a business model, to win, you really have to scale. You have to have the resources and the talent to really listen to those big institutional investors, the pensions, the endowments, the corporations. Everyone needs a crypto strategy. They need a trusted partner to help. They need a world-class brand. And so I just couldn't be more excited to leverage this incredible partnership between Franklin Templeton and our liquid strategies that we're bringing across. It's going to be insane.
I mean, Franklin Templeton, as we mentioned, is no stranger to crypto. They've been in the space for nearly a decade, almost. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. It's 2026. So I guess what is new here then with Franklin Crypto? What is it bringing to the table that did not already exist?
Yeah, as you know, Jenny Johnson from the beginning is an OG, and she has been absolutely focused on building world-class solutions for clients. Look, Seth and I and the team coming over from CoinFund, we've been hardcore in the space full-time with one of the oldest liquid strategies in the world that we bring across that really native expertise and additional resources, some world-class talent with the team that we have, along with some very differentiated experiences that really are going to complement the team that already exists, very capable team that already exists, led by Tony Pecor. And so the three of us are going to drive this new unit. And it's like the first of many things you're going to hear about scale, right? We're here. We didn't come here to be small. We came here to be the leading active manager in the world and really solving the problem for all these clients. So they have a problem, right? A couple of years ago, and I talk to them all the time. They're like, I had all this risk. I couldn't be in the crypto space. I had so much risk. There's reputational risk. There's operational risk. Now I have a lot of risk if I'm not in this space. I need help. And I think we bring that real crypto nativity. Hopefully we're those trusted agents who navigate them through. We're in the space full time. Crypto is a weird place. There's incredible value, but you guys know it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And for players who've been able to navigate that for some time, hopefully we can bring some real value to our clients.
Are you muted, Ellie?
Oh, yes, I am
There you
muted.
go.
I saw the
speechless.
announcement and I put it in our Crypto in America group chat. And I said, guys, look, Chris is a suit now. Gerald
That
goes,
is verbatim what she said, yes.
he said he's always been a suit. He just took a detour. And I was like, oh yeah, that's so true. Because you were on Wall Street before.
Yeah,
going
I was
into
on.
crypto.
Yeah,
So
I was. Well, I'm weird, right? I had 3 careers. I was a U.S. Marine, fought in Iraq. Man, I've been spending so much time looking at Iran and its impact on global economics in the crypto space. So that was my first life, and then I did 15 years in TradFi, starting at Lehman Brothers. Then I built a bunch of businesses at Citigroup. People don't know this, but Sandy Call over at Franklin Templeton, we got into crypto together. I think it was like 2013 or 2014. We sat next to each other and we started I was running a big clearing business, so I'd had to really focus on how this could change settlements completely. And she's the big brain. She's the futurist. She's always thinking about what's next. And so together we would kind of riff on what this would mean. And it's just so funny that we're reunited again after all these years. She's a wonderful person, one of the biggest thinkers in crypto and in finance. And it's a great partnership that's just going to be great.
I was going to ask why Franklin Templeton, but you just answered my question. So you guys obviously go back a long time. But my next question is, how do you think clients of Franklin Templeton are going to get comfortable with liquid strategies around crypto, given the amount of volatility in the space over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that attracts us to Franklin Templeton is just the breadth of resource and distribution. And what we can do is we can take our expertise, work with those folks around the world, Franklin's distribution, to really educate clients. And my goal is to provide, not a singular liquid strategy that we're going to try to, push them into, but rather to have really thoughtful strategies that accomplish their objectives in the space. And Franklin Templeton gives us the scale to do it. And so, there's going to be a lot of education involved, a lot of hand-holding, and a lot of support. But when you're a client-driven business, that's what you do. You listen and you build to solve their problems. And whether it was my job on Wall Street or beforehand, we are problem solvers. And I could not be more excited.
Yeah, Chris, I remember when we were talking, I want to say it was like a few weeks ago, and you were going out into the world, and obviously weren't able to stay independent for too long. I know there's a lot of demand, and it sounds like you found a great home there. But you mentioned something that I wasn't anticipating us covering, but is probably pretty prescient for us to cover. How do you, given your experience, think the conflict in Iran is going to affect our industry, or sort of global commodities more broadly? Where do you see this going? Because I know there's a lot of conflicting information. We're done, we're not done, we're sending troops. I know there was an incident with some pilots this morning. It doesn't seem like there's an easy exit strategy here. So how would you advise clients? How are you talking to folks about what's going on over there?
Yeah, you mentioned that the shooting down of an F-15. I can talk about personal experience. I was actually on the USS Kearsarge in 1995 when Scott O'Grady was shot down over Serbia, and I was part of the ship that rescued him. So I have a little bit of experience here. And the good news here is that I think one of the pilots was recovered. There's 2 Marine units on station with capabilities, and I pray for the Marines and for the pilots and everyone else involved every single day. But when you think about crypto, I think this is going to, obviously there's near-term volatility. We're seeing the asset class as a frontier risk asset stay quite resilient. In a way, I think it's a bit of a coiled spring, and I'll tell you why. Right now, across the world, we are in max realpolitik. There's 2 schools of thought in international relations. One is idealism, one is realpolitik, where you act on your interests, right? We're in max realpolitik. We're not there to bring democracy to Iran. The president's made it very clear, I want the oil, blah, 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 blah. And what happens in this environment is it becomes trustless, permissionless. And what does that sound like to you, right? It is perfect for crypto. It's going to accelerate it's going to accelerate adoption across the world. People are saying, well, this is the end of the dollar. The dollar is going to decouple. I've got news for you. Sure, governments are going to want to decouple from it. And that's part of what we saw with the dislocation in Bitcoin. They dumped dollars. They bought gold. Why did governments do that? Because the guys making the decision were 70 and 80 years old. That's what they do. But against that tactical government action, when you step back around the world, amongst the people, there's insatiable desire for dollars. So I expect for this to accelerate stablecoin adoption, accelerate crypto adoption. Look, I would lie to say, hey, this is how you trade these markets here and now. You can't. It's too volatile. There's too much unknown. But when you step back and you look at the big trends that are happening right now, this is the ideal solution. Trustless, permissionless capitalism will prevail. And I think that is going to be amazing. And by the way, the last thing I'll tell you is that despite this geopolitical stress, and despite the fact you look at fear and greed, everyone's freaking out. They're like, oh my God, we're all going to die. Crypto's over, quantum, whatever. The fundamentals underneath continue to improve. I mean, nobody covers it like Ellie, but whether you like it or not, we're getting regulatory certainty. We couldn't have a better foundation. That sets the grounds for institutions to really come in. If we get Clarity Act, and I know you guys probably have your different perspectives and it varies by the day, I think we're going to get it. Why? Because when Epic Fury started, the bombs started flowing, right? What does Trump do? He tweets or goes on True Social and says, get Clarity done, while the bombs first start blowing up, right? Yeah. What that tells me is he has the will and he's going to cash in the political chips to make it happen. And as you guys know in DC, if you have the chips and you want to pay for it, you can get it done. I think it gets done. I think this whole interest thing is baloney. I think we're going to get through it. I have thoughts on that. But at the end of the day, if we get clarity, we will have relative animal spirits once that geopolitical noise abates.
Tell us your yield thoughts, Chris.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Back on.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So first of all, we're gonna have to clip quantum whatever Chris Perkins.
Honestly, yeah.
But no. So Chris, on this idea of the strength of stablecoin projecting power, the U.S. kind of maintaining this dominance. There was a great thing that I was listening to this morning, talking about this was supposed to be the year of this market expansion, kind of broadening out, right, and seeing that go into a lot of emerging markets. And people leaving the dollar in this like realpolitik age, but now it seems like the U.S. has remained like everybody's still pouring into U.S. assets. So despite the conflict, like why do you think it's kind of counterintuitive, right? That we've alienated or at least deprioritized several allies and we've made a lot of these moves, but the U.S. still continues to be the place where people need their assets. So how do you approach that?
I mean, it really comes down to one thing that's very, very obvious, and the fact is that the U.S. is the flight to safety. It has the strongest economy in the world. We're energy independent. We have the most robust national security that there is, and so of course we're a flight to safety. In a world where, in a trustless world, what's the best thing that you can do is probably go to the dollar. Are you going to trust your local currency or are you going to trust the dollar? You're going to go into the dollar. That's what makes the stablecoin appeal so interesting to folks in the developing world. And so you see, in a world of uncertainty, people will always flock to the relative place of safety. And then, of course, the Bitcoin maxis will say, well, you can't trust the dollar, currency debasement. Well, guess what? That's where crypto comes in. And we have things like Bitcoin to keep the dollar honest. And so at the end of the day, the U.S. is emerging out of this even stronger in a sense as a hegemon because of its relative strength. And look, if you're Europe right now, you have some challenges. You're now within ballistic missile range of Iran. Didn't really realize that before. You're really stuck from an energy perspective because the Strait of Hormuz is stuck. That makes you more dependent on Russia, which you really don't want, and also the US. And so, I think there's maximum pressure right now, as you step back, maximum pressure on the Europeans and maximum pressure on China because they have to open that strait. It's more their problem than it is America's problem. For now, I mean, at the end of the day, if the world economy really tanks because of issues in the Strait of Hormuz, it will come back to the U.S. But if it does, the U.S. is still going to be, from a relative perspective, I believe, better off. So at the end of the day, I think all this geopolitical stress will ultimately accelerate the adoption of the asset class that we love. because it's the only real solution.
Chris, before we let you go, I'm going to tie you into the drift conversation that we had with Rebecca Rettig from Jito, and we're about to have with Austin Campbell from the Zero Knowledge Group.
Oh, Austin.
Now that you're working at Franklin Templeton and you're in a suit on the asset management side of things, we want to kind of know, what do you think is the external perspective from more of these traditional firms, asset management firms, and then like the investors and clients within this space? Do you think this hurts the way they'll engage going forward if these exploits continue to happen at such a massive scale?
Yeah, Austin and I have an ongoing public disagreement. We're also good friends, and I love to be able to disagree with somebody without hating them, which sometimes for some reason that's the thing to do today. But like, love that guy. I believe that trustless, permissionless blockchains have an important role to play into the future, just like your previous guest. And so you should challenge him on that.
All right,
I do believe. Yeah, I believe that security, however, is a humongous issue. Like I've said from the very beginning, institutions, they're more than happy to take market risk. That's what they get paid to underwrite. They are not comfortable taking reputational risk or operational risk, and you could throw cyber risk into that and hacking, right? That has to get solved for. Hacking risk is not a risk because you're a public permissionless chain. It's everywhere, right? And a couple of the issues that we have, and I think about every day, is the issue of latency, right? Essentially, if I have a real world asset, tokenized equity, a tokenized stablecoin, whatever, let's start with equities as the easiest solution. People will say, wait a second, my stuff's safe because the transfer agent knows who's what. The problem is the bad guys will get a hold of that and they'll bridge into another asset and off they go. And by the time they're out of town, we can't move fast enough. There are no easy solutions here other than saying, we're continuing to see additional innovation across the AI agent space on ways to enhance security. Apps need to be highly sensitized to best practices. Most of these hacks have been social engineering, which is insane. So how do we start coming up with capabilities and processes? It's always a race against time. But the only solution, aside from some of those tech solutions that I'm aware of, is a policy solution. Mm-hmm. And you know what I'm going to say? It's privateers. Right? It's having private citizens be able to go out and reclaim or recover. And so I'm not allowed to use the word privateer anymore because it's a little bit too degen, even though it's in our Constitution. But the way that we're phrasing it now in DC is, hey guys, you're going through markups now with Clarity. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a recovery part of that bill where private citizens are authorized to recover assets that are stolen? That increases the surface area. It helps the government. It's tax free. It helps fund the Bitcoin reserve or crypto reserve. So like these are the out of the box kind of solutions that we really need to solve for. But like security, I think is like the number one issue that prevents like really broader adoption. And that's why you're seeing people embrace institutional products like ETFs, tokenized money market funds, et cetera, because the institutions generally tend to be better than the degen playing around in DeFi.
Well, that's well said, Chris. And we're about to bring Austin on so we could get his take too. But
get his rebuttal.
Yeah, just tell him that you just had Perkins on and I said he was wrong.
He's backstage so he can hear you.
All right.
So.
Yeah,
nasty things about me, but I love the good professor. He does need to get a haircut though, and I will talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Chris. Congrats on the new job.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't need an introduction now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe we could just throw the two of them up and we'll just sit back and.
I was also going to say we should just bring in
popcorn. Yeah.
We'll just bring in Austin and Chris together next time, and we can just have them face off. It'll just be. Yeah. We don't even need to moderate. So let's bring in Austin now, without further ado. Austin, what do you have to say to Chris?
Well, I apologize for not bringing some cool sunglasses like Chris. But
you got the glasses on, though.
Yeah, I will not be getting a haircut, Chris. I know this is a long point of contention between us, and it's not happening. But no, so two things on that front. One, I actually think Chris is onto something very important here with regard to improving the discourse in this space, which is if we can't disagree with respect and stop trying to either scream at people or silence people, we're not going to get anywhere positive. And I would tell everybody, crypto has had a long trend of like trying to shout down critics and scream at people or like sue people over things they've said. None of that's helpful. What we need are real solutions. And so Chris and I are actually friends. Like, we don't just do a podcast, we hang out together. And I hope for other people in the space, you understand, even if people disagree, it's the clash of those views that are going to lead us to a better place. So as a starting point, totally on board with Chris there. 2, I actually do agree with the security thing. I think the problem is the security surface has been very misunderstood. Like, we were talking about drift earlier. I know you had Rebecca on as well, another friend actually. And when you're thinking about what's happening here, fundamentally from the perspective of a normal two-legged person, like the average potential user, if we can't get to a place where people feel safe leaving their money in crypto, they're just not going to use it. And everything else to some extent is noise. You can't expect the average human to become a in-depth security and technical expert just to have a place to put their money. We need to get to a better security space. And so drift, if you look closely, is one of the things that reveals the weakness in the current crypto market, which is to say we have an allegedly decentralized protocol controlled by a multi-sig that a few people have the ability to upgrade, that a change in the background leads to control of funds and a bunch of money being drained, and then a bunch of users who thought it was decentralized and there was a stable set of rules being expropriated. So one part of that is, how do you think about protocol design? What controls should they have? What is the definition of decentralization? The other part of that, and this is part of my ongoing argument with Chris, is how do we get to belt and suspenders in this ecosystem so that it's not one set of people who are responsible for all the security? Because the other thing you learn from traditional finance is anytime there's one person responsible, it's a matter of time until there's a failure, right? Until we get to a world where we have multiple layers of security for the issuers of tokens, for protocols, potentially at the validator layer, we're not going to have a system that is robust, because when it's one, either somebody will get hacked, somebody will get compromised, or quite frankly, somebody will turn out to be corrupt or unethical, and then you have a problem.
Austin, how would you define the belts and suspenders? We've heard of hoodies, and we know the suit side, but I don't know that corner.
Well, and let me just ask a quick, just on that point, when you look at the Security Council's role here, do you think that was like mostly theater? I mean, like what does that look like?
I mean, it's definitely mostly theater until we start stopping these things, right? Like, you kind of define risk by the outcomes in some ways. I would tell you, if I'm looking at what happened here, anybody auditing drift or like looking at the underlying structure was asleep at the wheel. To think you could have a handful of people with upgradable authority and that's decentralized or secure is a mistake. Circle was also asleep at the wheel. If all of this money goes out from USDC and you just ignore it and say, well, I'm going to wait for a court, there's going to be no freeze. That is not like comporting with the rules and procedures that are going to be promulgated for Genius. It's not how the OCC thinks. I worked at 2 different OCC regulated banks. If we had something super suspicious going on and we're like, whatever, we'll wait for a court, that's not going to end well. And so as we're looking at this world and as we're thinking of belt and suspenders, what it means is multiple people who are either willing to be responsible or taking authority for the safety of user funds, or if they're not, we need to have an environment where people understand it is truly live fire. We have very good disclosure about who has control of what. And if you end up having control over funds, right, or transactions, like, I don't want to live in a world where the DOJ was right about Tornado Cash, but that kind of feels like what we're talking about if all the decentralization is just theater.
Austin, I'm glad you brought up Circle, because that's sort of the one component of this whole thing that we haven't touched on yet today. But I'm curious your take on what happened there, because as you mentioned, the funds were moved in USDC over Circle's bridge. I think it was something over like 6 hours this was happening, but nothing was done
during business hours. Yeah,
right. Nothing was done on the Circle side. I mean, is the expectation now that Circle should have frozen the funds immediately? Did they know? I mean, what's your take on what happened on their side of things? I mean, I don't think they've come out with a public statement unless I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen one from Circle, but my take is if you read Genius, issuers are required not just to monitor KYC at the time of mint burn, but also now to look at the ecosystem. And Circle has freeze capabilities. So the thing that was confusing to me is when there seems to be an obvious exploit and an obvious hack going on, why would you not freeze those tokens and see what happens? Right? That is to say, just lock them in place and go ask everybody who is in control of this, who is supposed to be in control of this, what is going on, and who's the rightful owner. Because exactly as Chris said, if you do nothing, things move, in this case, relatively slowly, but into tokens that you can no longer interdict, like ETH or Bitcoin. And those are, by the way, working as intended. Like, I don't believe these rules should apply to Bitcoin. But if we have real world assets, we should be applying real world rules to them. And if you want to use the dollar, there's rules attached to that system. The idea that people should be able to take a couple $100 million in what is a pretty well-known and well-circulated exploit that is, proceeding over 6 hours and the issuer does nothing would be a complete failure of genius in what Congress was trying to achieve there.
Austin, has Circle in the past stopped exploits like this, or Tether or other major exchange or major stablecoin issuers? Have they interrupted it, or is this kind of like a new thought that you have where you're like, hey, you should have done something?
So Circle has been one of the slower ones. I would put Tether in the middle ground on this one. And I would say I was personally involved at one point at Paxos in interdicting one of these, where, for those of you who remember the whole debacle with FTX, after they had already gone down, there was an additional hack on some of the FTX funds where a hacker was trying to move things out of there. And we managed to interdict a decent amount of USDP and Pax Gold from being taken away. And so what I'm looking at with Genius, and sort of the whole thrust of my argument with Chris, is truly permissionless systems are valuable in that they provide a check on corrupt governments and corrupt legal systems, right? If I always have the ability to opt into Bitcoin, it does create sort of a floor on governance. So that's very important for the world. But on the other hand, that's just the floor. We should try to do better with the ceiling. And so if we have a system of US dollar stablecoins that have freeze and seize capabilities, but we're going to cover our eyes in the case of a hack, what are we doing here? Are we truly going to tell the average user that, yeah, put your money in there, but we don't have disclosure on who has control, and if there's a hack, you're on your own? To me, that sounds to the average doctor, nurse, lawyer, MTA employee, because I live in New York, don't use crypto. Because if you're driving a train underground and there's a hack, you can't go get your funds out.
Right.
Yeah, Austin, you make a great point on the role of the dollar in this system, but there's another side to this, which is, what do you think the obligations of the bridges and the exchanges are in kind of this universe? Because I would imagine that if you make stablecoins really, let's call it security resistant, and the issuers are following all these rules, a lot of the time, I mean, I think, there's, I don't quote me on this, but it's North Korea is maybe one of the largest holders of ETH, right? So there are other assets out there, and there's just bridges and ramps and sort of exchange question. How do you see that being fixed?
I mean, Gerald, ultimately your question simplifies down to what is decentralization and when does it apply in some ways, right? And, by the way, there are a lot of important voices in this discussion. I am not a standalone here. My friend Omid, another professor, the good folks at Coin Center, DeFi Education Fund, a lot of people have views here, but I'll simplify mine down to this, which is, we need much better standards about what decentralization is, and those standards need to start with effective control. I think if you have effective control, you should be required to interdict these sorts of things. And if you want to have control and build in that way, you have to accept responsibilities. So that would capture exchanges, that would capture many types of bridges, that would capture protocols that are, let us say, engaging in decentralization theater. What it would not capture is things like Bitcoin. And so to me, it's, if you want to do the hard work to truly become decentralized, where no party can interdict these things under any circumstances, that's fine. And if you're not, the boundary condition should be that. And anybody outside of it, I think, should have some degree of obligations to interdict these things.
Austin, you mentioned the Genius Act, and then Clarity also has, I believe it's Title 3 and Title 6. There's some provisions around DeFi protocols. And would this, say the Clarity Act was passed, would this have changed anything in a situation like this, or is this kind of outside the scope of what the bill is trying to address on this front?
I think there are a lot of elements of the bill that are relevant here, right? As you look at how Clarity defines things, one of the points we're grappling with is what is decentralization? When do things like innovation exemptions apply? You've seen this even in the SEC's guidance that they're promulgating before Clarity is even potentially becoming law, of them grappling with what does decentralization mean. But yeah, Eleanor, to your point, yes, it would help, because it's starting to say if you don't follow these types of rules and truly not have control over these things, you're probably swept in as some type of entity that needs to register. Like, put simply, if I put a front end out there and I drop a bunch of smart contracts, but it's a one-of-one signature authority to upgrade it all and take control of the tokens, I probably have control. And these are the sorts of things that we need to start addressing, right? Because there's a big difference between that structure and, say, Uniswap, or if you want to go all the way Bitcoin.
Gotcha.
Dang, Austin, we could keep you for another 30 minutes, but our producers would kill us. So we have to wrap on this.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to come back if we want to talk more, but thank you for the time, and I hope we continue to disagree constructively.
I think this story will continue to play out, so we will certainly have you back, Austin. But thank you for the time, and happy Easter weekend.
Yeah, everybody as well. Take care.
Yeah, thanks.
Happy Passover.
Yeah.
How about,
Sorry.
how about us Jewish people, Ellie? Okay.
Passover, Easter weekend. I'm sorry.
Happy holiday weekend.
Not inclusive. Happy holiday weekend,
I'll
guys.
remember this. Yeah.
You like
Well, this is a
chocolate,
great
Jacqueline?
episode.
Do you eat chocolate for Passover?
You could have chocolate. It's more of a matzah thing, but sure.
More of a matzah thing, yeah.
It's more about like bitterness and, you know, I'm not going to give you guys a history lesson. That's okay.
I'm looking forward to my Easter basket personally. I'm going to get mini eggs and a lot of chocolate.
That's
okay, well,
exciting.
I got parsley dipped in salt water and bitter herbs. So
lovely.
There we go. That's the
that
fun.
Sounds like a great tradition. Yeah. All right.
Well, happy holiday
This is a great episode. Happy holidays, everyone.
Okay. See you guys next Friday.
Yes.
See you next week. Thanks, guys.